Part 1. A quiet neighborhood. It was supposed to be the dream home. A fresh start for our family. The house on Maple Street looked perfect. A 2-story brick front home with white shutters and a wraparound porch. It even had a spacious backyard with tall leafy trees. Everything we wanted. When we moved in, the neighborhood was quiet, peaceful. No one could have predicted what would follow. We had been living in a cramped apartment for years, and this house felt like freedom. The first week, everything seemed normal. We unpacked boxes, explored the rooms, and I remember standing in the kitchen, looking out through the window at the street, imagining how nice it would be to sit out on the porch in the evenings. It was one of those rare moments where life felt right. But something was off. I noticed it the second night. A slight chill in the air, a heaviness in the house that didn't quite fit with the warm summer weather. At first, I brushed it off. Maybe it was just the difference between an apartment and a real house. The space felt different, more alive in some way. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, even if I couldn't put my finger on it. The first odd thing happened a couple of days after we moved in. My daughter, Ellie, was playing in the living room, building a tower of blocks while I sat in the kitchen. I could hear her voice occasionally, but then there was a long, unsettling silence. When I went to check on her, I found her staring at the hallway, eyes wide, her little finger pointing toward the far end of the corridor. "Mom," she said quietly, "there's someone standing over there." I turned, but of course, there was nothing. I walked down the hallway to reassure her. The air felt thick, as if something was lingering just out of sight, but I didn't want to alarm her. "It's okay," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "There's no one here." But Ellie didn't take her eyes off that empty spot. "He's still there," she whispered. "I saw him." I tried to brush it off, but I couldn't help the unease that crept up my spine. I had to tell myself it was just her imagination. Kids often see things that aren't really there, right? That night I thought about the feeling in the hallway, that sense of being watched, but I kept it to myself. I didn't want to scare my family, especially Ellie. Maybe she was just tired. Or maybe it was the strange, unfamiliar surroundings playing tricks on her mind. Still that night, sleep didn't come easily. I lay awake in bed, listening to the house settle. The creaks of the wood, the distant sound of the wind brushing against the windows. At some point, I thought I heard footsteps. Soft, slow footsteps echoing from upstairs. My heart skipped a beat. I checked on Ellie, but she was fast asleep. No one was upstairs. It was probably just the old house making noise, but somehow I didn't believe it. That was just the beginning. I wish I could have ignored it, just chalked it up to nerves or an old house that had settled in weird ways, but I couldn't. Part 2. Signs of the unseen. As the days went on, I tried to settle into a routine, unpacking the last of the boxes, making sure everything was just right, and focusing on the normal tasks of daily life. But the house, it wasn't the same. Little things started happening that didn't make sense. At first, it was so subtle, I couldn't be sure if I was imagining it. The first major sign was the mirrors. It started in the upstairs bathroom. One evening, as I was brushing my teeth, I noticed something in the reflection. A figure standing just outside the bathroom door. At first, I thought it was just the shadows playing tricks on me, but when I turned, no one was there. The hallway was empty. I told myself it was nothing, just a fleeting moment. Maybe I hadn't seen what I thought I had. But the next morning, I couldn't shake the image of that shadow. It felt like someone had been watching me. It was an eerie, creeping sensation that dug into my chest, but I pushed it down. Then came the sounds. It started small, things shifting in the night. The first time I heard it, I thought it was just the wind, but the sounds weren't from outside. They were inside the house. Soft scraping noises from the kitchen. The sound of something small, like a spoon, being dragged across the countertop. Or the quiet shuffle of footsteps across the wooden floors when everyone was supposed to be in bed. I checked the house each time, but nothing was ever out of place. The kitchen was always empty, the floors untouched. I began to lose track of what I had already checked and what I hadn't, as the sounds seemed to follow me through the house. Ellie started acting different too. She had always been a bubbly, lively child, but now she seemed distant. She spent more time in her room, staring out the window at nothing. I'd catch her muttering under her breath sometimes, words I couldn't understand, even though she was speaking in full sentences. "Who are you talking to?" I asked one evening as I came into her room. Ellie didn't respond immediately. When she finally looked up at me, her eyes were wide, glazed over like she was in a trance. "He's here," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "He doesn't like it when you're here. He wants you to leave." The hair on the back of my neck stood up. I tried to laugh it off, as if it was just another one of her odd phases. But something about the way she said it felt real, too real. A few days later, I woke up to the sound of something tapping at my window. I pulled the blinds aside, but there was no one there. Just the empty yard, the trees swaying in the breeze. Nothing out of the ordinary. Yet, as I stood there staring out, the feeling of being watched returned, stronger this time. I couldn't shake the sensation that someone or something was just outside my window. It was around this time that things started to get really unsettling. It wasn't just the sounds or the shadows anymore. It was something far more tangible. One afternoon, I was doing laundry in the basement when I heard a noise from above. I assumed it was Ellie, so I called out, but no one responded. I went upstairs to find her, but she wasn't in her room. The house was silent. Too silent. When I walked into the kitchen, my stomach dropped. The glass of water I had left on the counter was gone. I hadn't seen anyone come in, and I certainly hadn't moved it. I opened every cupboard, checking for a misplaced glass, but there was nothing. I went back into the living room, and there it was, on the coffee table, sitting just where I had left it earlier that day. The glass of water. It was small things like this that slowly began to tear away at my sense of safety. The house was playing games with me, and I didn't know how to stop it. The final straw came one evening when I was sitting in the living room, the only light coming from the flickering fireplace. It was late, everyone was asleep, and I thought I could finally relax. But as I sat there, I saw it again, the shadow. This time, it wasn't at the edge of my vision. It was clear right in front of me, a tall, dark figure standing by the staircase, just watching. I froze, my heart hammering in my chest. I knew I wasn't imagining it. It wasn't just a trick of the light. I blinked and it was gone. But the weight of that presence lingered long after. The house was no longer just a building. It had become something else. Something alive. Part 3. The incident. By now, I was starting to question my own sanity. I wasn't the only one who felt it, though. The strange occurrences were too frequent, too consistent to ignore. Ellie's behavior was getting worse. She would often sit in the corner of her room, staring at nothing, whispering quietly to herself. Sometimes she would laugh, an eerie sound that sent a chill through me. My husband Tom had been away on a business trip, and I was beginning to feel more and more isolated. I told myself it was just the stress of the move, the strange new environment, but deep down, I knew something was wrong. Then, one night, everything changed. It was late, maybe around 2 a.m., when I woke up to the unmistakable sound of footsteps. Soft, deliberate footsteps, slow and steady, pacing back and forth across the floor above me. My heart leaped in my chest as I lay there, frozen under the covers. Tom was still away, and Ellie was sound asleep in her room. There was no one else in the house. I crept out of bed, my bare feet cold against the hardwood floor. The footsteps continued, and with each step the sound grew louder, closer, as if someone was walking toward me. I reached the stairs and hesitated for a moment, my breath shallow, my pulse quickening. I called out, but the house was silent in response. No answer. Summoning every ounce of courage, I climbed the stairs, each step creaking under my weight. As I reached the top, I paused, straining to listen. The sound was still there, echoing down the hallway. It wasn't just footsteps anymore. It was as if something was dragging its feet, a heavy shuffle, the dragging sound sending a sickening feeling to the pit of my stomach. I knew that sound. It was too unnatural to ignore. I walked down the hall, every fibre of my being telling me to turn around, but I couldn't stop myself. I pushed open the door to the master bedroom, but there was no one there. Nothing was out of place. My heart pounded in my chest, and I felt a cold sweat break out on my neck. But the house wasn't empty. I could feel it, the presence, lurking just beyond my sight. That's when I saw it. At the far end of the hallway, in the corner by the staircase, I caught a glimpse of something, someone. standing in the dark. A tall figure, too tall for any normal person, completely still. It was almost as if it was waiting for me to notice it. I stood there, unable to move. The figure was completely black, blending with the shadows around it, so dark that it seemed like a void within the darkness itself. It didn't move, didn't blink, just stood there, its outline faint but distinct. My skin crawled as I stared at it, my breath caught in my throat. "Who's there?" I managed to whisper, but my voice barely made it past my lips. There was no answer. The figure didn't respond. It just stood there as if daring me to come closer. But something deep inside me screamed not to. Every instinct told me to run, to get out of the house as fast as I could, but I couldn't move. My body was paralyzed, frozen in place by an overwhelming sense of dread. And then it moved. The figure didn't walk. It glided, shifting silently through the hallway, its movement fluid, unnatural. It crossed the space between us in an instant, and before I could react, it was gone, disappearing into the darkness at the top of the stairs. I don't know how long I stood there, staring into the empty hallway, trying to convince myself that it wasn't real. But I knew it was. Whatever that thing was, it was real. I ran back into my room, slammed the door shut, and locked it. My heart was pounding so loudly I thought it might burst. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. I just sat there, in the dark, listening to the silence. But that silence didn't last long. A faint noise came from down the hall, scratching like fingernails dragging across wood. It was getting closer, closer, until it stopped right outside my door. I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears. It was so loud, so frantic. I was sure the thing could hear it too. I held my breath, my body trembling, waiting for it to pass. The scratching continued, a slow, deliberate movement. But then the door handle rattled. The softest click as the lock turned, followed by the unmistakable sound of something or someone pushing against the door. I leaped to my feet, backing away, my hands trembling as I reached for my phone. I tried to call Tom, but the call wouldn't go through. The signal had dropped. I could hear it now, the thing outside the door breathing. It was as though it was listening for me, waiting for me to make a move. The door creaked again, but this time it didn't open. The noise stopped. I don't know how long I sat there, too terrified to move. My entire body was shaking, drenched in sweat, my mind racing. Every logical thought screamed that I was imagining things, that my fear had taken over. But deep down, I knew it wasn't my imagination. The rest of the night passed in tense silence, though I couldn't bring myself to sleep. I stayed awake, staring at the door, half expecting it to open, half praying it wouldn't. By morning, the terror had subsided just enough for me to believe it was all a nightmare. Maybe I was just exhausted. Maybe the house was settling. But as I stood up and walked toward the door, I froze. The floor beneath my feet was slick, wet, as if something had been dripping. I opened the door, and my eyes fell on the floor outside. It was covered in footprints. Small, muddy footprints leading down the stairs and out of the house. Part 4, the aftermath. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. My mind raced with 100 thoughts, each more terrifying than the last. Small, muddy footprints leading out of the house. I didn't want to look at them, but I couldn't look away. They were undeniable, each step clearly visible on the floor, damp and fresh. The air was thick with the same unease that had plagued me for weeks, but now it was worse. This was real. I backed away slowly from the door, my eyes never leaving the footprints. My heart pounded in my chest, and the temperature in the house seemed to drop another few degrees. There was no logical explanation for this. No way a person could have entered without me hearing them. No way that those prints could have appeared so suddenly, so clearly. I didn't even notice the time passing until Ellie appeared at the top of the stairs, her small figure silhouetted in the dim light. Her voice, quiet and distant, broke the silence. "Mom, who's that?" I snapped my head up, heart racing. Ellie was staring at the empty space where the footprints led out the door. But she wasn't looking at the floor. She was looking at the doorway. The same doorway I had just closed behind me. "Who's there?" she asked again, her eyes wide with something I couldn't quite place. Fear? Recognition? I wasn't sure. I walked to her, my legs shaky, and wrapped my arms around her. But her gaze didn't move from the empty hallway, and for the first time, I saw something I hadn't before, a flicker of recognition in her eyes, as if she knew something I didn't. I didn't want to ask, but I did anyway. Ellie, what do you mean? Who are you talking about? She glanced at me, her lips trembling, before answering in a small voice. The man who wants us to leave. My stomach dropped. I didn't know what to say, how to respond to that. The man! I thought of the figure I had seen in the hallway, standing just outside of my vision, the one that didn't belong. We need to leave, Mom, Ellie said. He says we're not supposed to be here. I couldn't even reply. I could only nod, because I knew in that moment that we couldn't stay in that house any longer. But even as I thought about leaving, another thought crept into my mind, a realization that chilled me to the bone. What if it was too late? What if the house had already claimed us? I packed as quickly as I could, trying to stay calm for Ellie's sake. I made calls, contacted a friend to stay with, but the whole time my mind was spinning, a whirlwind of fear. I kept seeing those footprints, imagining them crawling across the floor, tracking something that wasn't human. Every shadow in the house seemed to reach out to me, trying to grab hold to keep me there. But as we packed, something else happened, something worse. The house seemed to shift, to change. The doors creaked as if being nudged open and closed. The windows rattled. I could feel something pushing against the walls, testing the edges of my perception. It wasn't just a haunted house. It was something that was alive, something that wanted us there. When we finally left, I felt like I could breathe again. The house was behind me, but that feeling, the suffocating dread, lingered. I wanted to leave everything behind, to pretend none of it ever happened. But I couldn't. Not after what I had seen. Not after what Ellie had said. For weeks, I couldn't stop thinking about the house, about the figure in the hallway, about the footprints, and about the man Ellie had seen. We never returned. We couldn't. But sometimes, in the quiet of the night, when the house is still and the air is thick with that same unnatural chill, I wonder if it's still waiting, if it's still looking for someone to step inside. And I wonder, just for a moment, if it will ever be satisfied. Part 1. Weekend Getaway. We thought it would be the perfect weekend getaway. Just a few days out in the woods, away from the constant buzz of city life. A cabin in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by trees and silence. The group of us, me, Mark, Jake and Laura, were tired of the noise, the endless traffic, and the never-ending grind of the daily routine. So when we found the cabin, tucked away on a private property near a remote forest, we couldn't resist. It looked rustic, simple, just what we needed. We arrived late on a Friday evening. The sun was sinking beneath the horizon, casting a soft glow over the trees, and the air had that fresh, earthy scent that only nature can offer. The cabin was just as we imagined, old, wooden, with an inviting porch, and a fireplace that seemed to promise warmth on the cold nights to come. As we settled in, there was an odd sense of peace. No cell service, no distractions, just the sound of crickets chirping, the wind rustling through the leaves, and the occasional bird call. It felt like paradise. But as soon as the night came, something began to shift in the atmosphere. It started with a strange feeling, a sense that we weren't alone, like someone was watching us from the shadows. At first, I thought it was just the isolation of the woods playing tricks on me. We were in the middle of nowhere after all. But the feeling wouldn't go away. It lingered, like a heavy fog in the back of my mind. We spent the evening sitting on the porch, drinking beer and talking about everything and nothing. Mark joked about how weird it was to be in a place so far removed from the rest of the world. But as he spoke, I noticed something in the distance, a flicker of movement between the trees. I didn't say anything at first. Maybe it was just an animal. But as the minutes ticked by, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't imagining it. Someone or something was out there just watching us. "Did you see that?" I asked Mark, my voice low. He looked in the direction I was pointing, but whatever it was had already disappeared. "See what?" he asked, not sounding too concerned. "Something moved over there between the trees," I replied, though I wasn't sure what it was I had seen. Mark laughed it off. "Probably just a deer or something. You're freaking yourself out. It's just the woods." But I wasn't so sure. My skin prickled, and my eyes kept darting to the dark outline of the trees. There was something off about this place, something that felt wrong in a way I couldn't explain. As the night wore on, the feeling intensified. I couldn't stop looking into the woods, half expecting to see something, or someone, emerge from the darkness. Laura and Jake seemed to sense it too. They kept glancing nervously at the trees, their eyes flicking toward the woods whenever the wind shifted. We didn't talk about it directly, but we all knew something was out there, watching, waiting. We decided to go inside for the night, though I didn't feel any safer in the cabin. The walls felt thin, like the house itself was barely holding its ground against the outside world. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of leaves in the wind made my heart race a little faster. We shut all the windows, locked the doors, and settled into our rooms, though sleep didn't come easily. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of the forest outside. But the usual comforting sounds of nature had turned into something unsettling. The wind howled through the trees, branches scratching against the cabin like fingers tapping at the window. And then, the footsteps. They were faint at first, soft, distant. But as the night deepened, the footsteps grew louder. It was as though someone was walking around the cabin, circling us. Slow, deliberate steps, like they were trying to stay quiet, but they couldn't quite keep the sound of their movements hidden. I sat up in bed, my breath shallow, straining to hear. The others were already awake. I could tell by the sudden tension in the air, their stillness. "Did you hear that?" Jake whispered, his voice tight with fear. I nodded, but I didn't know what to say. I didn't want to say it out loud, didn't want to acknowledge what was happening. But we couldn't ignore it any longer. Someone or something was outside the cabin, pacing around us as if waiting for the right moment to make its move. The footsteps circled the cabin for what felt like hours, and then, just as suddenly as they had started, they stopped. There was a silence, deep and unsettling. I tried to convince myself it was just the wind or the trees moving. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. I got out of bed and walked to the window. I didn't know what I was hoping to see, but I pulled the curtain aside anyway, my eyes searching the darkness outside. At first, nothing. Then, as my eyes adjusted to the dark, I saw it. A figure standing at the edge of the woods, just beyond the reach of the porch light. A tall figure, motionless, watching us. I couldn't breathe, I couldn't move. It was a man, or at least it looked like a man, but his features were indistinct, swallowed by the darkness around him. He didn't move, didn't blink. He just stood there, staring directly at me. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest, my hand gripping the curtain so tightly my fingers ached. It was as if he knew I was watching him. But then, just like the shadow I had seen earlier, he vanished. I turned away from the window, my breath ragged, but I didn't know what to say. I couldn't say anything. The others had seen him too. I could tell by the terrified look in their eyes. "Let's get out of here," Mark said, his voice barely a whisper, but it was all I needed to hear. We all agreed, without speaking another word. We didn't even bother to grab our things. We just ran out the door and into the night, not looking back once. We didn't stop until we reached the nearest town, miles away. And we didn't talk much about it after. How could we? How could you explain what we had just seen? But as we left that cabin behind, the woods, and the figure that had been watching us from the shadows, I realized one thing. The forest doesn't forget, and neither does the thing that waits in it. Part 2. Growing Unease. The drive back to the city was long and silent. None of us spoke much, and I could tell we were all replaying the same events in our minds. The man in the woods, the footsteps, the feeling of being hunted. It had shaken us all, but none of us wanted to confront it directly. By the time we reached civilization, the adrenaline had worn off, and what was left was an unsettling emptiness, a gnawing anxiety that followed us like a shadow. It was a few days later when the nightmares began. I had woken up in a cold sweat, my heart hammering in my chest. The image of the man in the woods burned into my mind. The dream had felt so real. Him, standing at the edge of the trees, just watching. I could feel his gaze, heavy and oppressive, like it was pulling me toward him. And then, just as I reached out, I woke up, gasping for air. At first, I thought it was just a bad dream, the kind that comes after a traumatic experience. But then the dreams kept coming. Every night, the same figure, the same woods, and that sense of terror that I couldn't shake. And soon, I began to notice something else. I couldn't escape the woods, even when I was awake. One afternoon, a week after our trip, I was sitting at home, scrolling through my phone. I hadn't talked to Mark, Jake, or Laura much since we'd left the cabin. But when I opened my social media feed, something caught my eye. It was a post from Laura, and at first I thought nothing of it. She often posted pictures from her travels, but this time, something about the caption made my stomach turn. It was a picture of the woods, the same woods where we had stayed, the same trees. But it wasn't just any picture. The caption read, "Found this spot today. The woods seem different now. I swear I saw something standing between the trees. I don't think it was just a trick of the light." I didn't even know what to think. My mind immediately jumped to that man, that figure watching us. I had to know if she was talking about the same thing, so I texted her. "Laura, what do you mean by something? Did you see a person in the woods?" It took her a while to respond, but when she did, her message was short and simple. "I don't know. It wasn't a person. It was more like a shadow. I don't know how to explain it, but I don't feel right about it." I froze. It was as if the ground beneath me was shifting. I felt that same sense of dread wash over me, like the woods were reaching out, pulling me back in. I tried to call her, but the phone just rang and rang, eventually going to voicemail. I left a message urging her to call me back, but she never did. A few days passed, and I didn't hear from her again. But then, I received a message from Jake. It was a simple text with just one word: "He's back." That was all it said. I didn't need any further explanation. I knew exactly what he meant. The feeling that had haunted us in the woods had returned, and it was no longer confined to that cabin. It was following us, tracking us. We were being watched again, just like before. I didn't know what to do, or if there was anything I could do. I thought about calling the police, but what would I say? "I think we're being stalked by a shadow in the woods." They'd laugh me off the phone. I felt helpless, like I was trapped in a nightmare I couldn't escape. That evening, I went for a walk around my neighborhood, trying to clear my head. As I strolled past rows of houses, I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone, that figure, lurking in the shadows. The streets were empty, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Then, as I passed a corner house, I saw something that made my blood run cold. A figure, tall, dark, and motionless, was standing in the yard just behind the wrought iron fence. It looked like it was waiting for me to notice it. I stopped dead in my tracks, my body stiff with fear. I couldn't make out any details, but I knew it was him, the man from the woods. I didn't look back. I just kept walking, faster now, my heart racing in my chest, until I turned the corner and couldn't see him anymore. But I knew he was still out there somewhere. That night, I couldn't sleep. The figure from the woods haunted my thoughts, his presence lurking just beyond the edge of my vision, just out of reach. I tried to call Mark, but the call wouldn't go through. I tried Jake, but he didn't answer either. It felt like the world was closing in on me, and I was the only one left in it. Around 3 a.m., I decided to drive to the cabin, to go back to where it all started. I didn't know why. I just had this overwhelming need to see it again, to understand what had happened. Maybe, I thought, if I could go back, I could find some explanation. Some way to end this. I got in the car and drove through the night, the headlights illuminating the empty road ahead of me. As I neared the woods, my chest tightened, the air thick with the same unease I had felt before. It was as if the trees themselves were watching me, waiting for me to step into their shadow. When I finally reached the cabin, everything seemed normal at first. But when I stepped out of the car, I felt the air shift. Something had changed. The woods were quiet, too quiet, and that's when I saw it again. A shadow moving between the trees, just like before. I wanted to run, but my feet wouldn't move. I just stood there, staring into the dark. And then a voice echoed from the trees. It wasn't a voice I could hear with my ears. It was in my mind, deep and intrusive. "You shouldn't have come back." I froze. My breath hitched in my throat, and I felt a cold hand grip my chest. The figure stepped out from the trees, and this time I could see it clearly. It wasn't a man. It was something else, something not quite human. A shadow, shifting and contorting, its edges blurry, like it was made of darkness itself. It moved toward me, slow and deliberate. I could feel its presence, its eyes on me, even though I couldn't see its face. I ran. I didn't stop until I reached the car. I didn't look back once, too terrified to even consider what might be following me. When I got home, I locked every door and window. I called Mark and Jake, but neither answered. I don't know what happened to them after that. All I know is this: I haven't gone back to the woods, and I don't think I ever will. But sometimes in the quiet moments, when I close my eyes, I can still hear that voice. You shouldn't have come back. Part 1. Urban Exploration. The idea had seemed innocent enough at first, just a group of friends exploring an abandoned building. We'd been talking about it for weeks, itching for the thrill of getting inside a forgotten place, somewhere off the beaten path. Millfield Asylum had been closed for over a decade, its history obscured by rumours and urban legends. Some said it had been a place of horror, with its patients subjected to cruel and inhumane treatments. Others claimed it had been haunted, cursed even, by the dark energy left behind from the countless souls that had once passed through its walls. We didn't care much about the stories. To us, it was just another abandoned building, another relic of the past. The thrill was in the exploration, the unknown, the sense of being somewhere you shouldn't be. There were 5 of us: me, Chris, Sarah, Mike, and Evan. We had all seen the same urban exploration videos on YouTube, watched the same creepy documentaries. It was part of the fun, right? The danger was part of the allure. But we didn't truly believe any of the stories. Not at first. The asylum was located a few miles outside of town, nestled deep in the woods. We arrived just before dusk, the sky already darkening. The wind whispered through the trees and a chill seemed to settle in the air as we stood in front of the massive, decaying building. The gates were rusted, barely hanging on their hinges. There was an eerie sense of emptiness in the air as we stepped onto the property, but that only added to the excitement. We felt like we were trespassing on something forbidden, but the adrenaline made everything feel alive. "Ready for this?" Chris asked, grinning as he pulled out his flashlight. We didn't hesitate. We slipped through a gap in the broken gate and approached the main entrance. The building loomed over us, its dark windows like the empty eyes of a long-forgotten monster. A place that had been abandoned, left to rot, but still standing, clinging to whatever remnants of life it had left. The front door was ajar, the wood warped and splintered. It creaked as we pushed it open, the sound echoing in the silence. The air inside was thick with dust, and the smell of mildew clung to everything. My flashlight flickered, casting long shadows across the walls, the peeling paint, the rusted metal fixtures. "Let's stick together," Mike said, his voice unusually tense. We made our way deeper into the asylum, the wooden floor creaking under our weight. We explored room after room, each one filled with remnants of the past, old hospital beds, broken furniture, discarded medical equipment. It all seemed like the set of some horror movie, the kind of place you'd expect to find ghosts, but none of us believed in that. Not really. It was when we reached the old ward that things started to feel different. The moment we stepped into that hallway, a coldness hit us. It wasn't just the temperature, it was something more. It was a presence, a weight. The air felt thick, as though it was heavier than it should have been. I noticed Chris stop in his tracks, his flashlight wavering in his hand. "Did you hear that?" he whispered, looking around. I strained my ears, but all I could hear was the sound of our breathing and the occasional distant creak of the building. "What are you talking about?" I asked, uneasy. "It's just the building settling." Chris shook his head. "No, it's like footsteps. I swear I heard someone walking around up ahead." We all fell silent, listening. The building groaned, but there was no mistaking it. There was something else, something not of this world. "We should get out of here," Sarah said, her voice shaky. But I didn't want to leave. Not yet. My curiosity was stronger than my fear, and I wanted to see more. I stepped forward, shining my flashlight down the hallway. The shadows in the long corridor seemed to move, shifting in the periphery of my vision. That's when I saw it. A figure. It was standing at the far end of the hall, just beyond the reach of my flashlight's beam. A tall, thin figure, almost skeletal in appearance, draped in what looked like tattered hospital robes. I froze, the beam of my flashlight shaking as I tried to focus on it. "Did you see that?" I asked, my voice cracking. Everyone turned toward the end of the hallway, but by the time they looked, The figure was gone. "It's just a shadow," Mike said quickly, his voice strained. "Just the way the light's hitting the walls." But I wasn't convinced. It wasn't just the light. There was something wrong with that figure, something deeply unsettling. Before I could speak again, the temperature in the hallway seemed to drop. I could see my breath now, clouding in the air. And then the sound came again, those footsteps, this time closer, louder, almost in rhythm with our own. That was when the panic set in. "We need to leave," Evan said, his voice tight with fear, but it was too late. The door at the end of the hallway slammed shut with a deafening bang, shaking the walls, sending us all stumbling back. The floor beneath us seemed to tremble, as if the building itself was alive, reacting to our presence. I felt my stomach twist with dread. "Get to the exit," I shouted. We turned, scrambling toward the door we had entered through, but the hall seemed longer now, the distance stretching out before us. The footsteps followed us, closer now, the sound of them growing louder, heavier. Something was behind us, something chasing us, and it wasn't just the building. I don't know how we made it out of there. The panic had completely taken over, and we ran, stumbling over broken glass and debris as we fought our way toward the exit. When we finally burst out into the cold night air, we didn't stop. We didn't look back. We just kept running. We never spoke about what happened in there, not in detail. We didn't need to. We all felt it. The presence, the thing that had been waiting in the asylum. And now, even though we were safe, I still hear those footsteps sometimes. In the quiet, when I'm alone, when my mind starts to wander, I hear them, slow and deliberate, getting closer. And I know, deep down, that the asylum isn't finished with us. It's still watching, still waiting for the next group of explorers. And one day, it will claim another. Part 2. Fractured Reality. We didn't speak much after we fled Millfield Asylum that night. When we returned to town, we scattered like leaves in the wind, each of us retreating into our own lives, trying to convince ourselves that what happened was nothing more than a figment of our collective imaginations. But no matter how much I tried to ignore it, the memory of the footsteps, the cold presence in the asylum, lingered. It was only a few days later when I realized that the nightmare didn't end the moment we walked out of the asylum. It started with small things, things I could brush off as mere coincidence. I began hearing footsteps in my apartment at odd hours of the night. Light knocks on my door when I was alone. At first, I thought it was just my mind playing tricks on me. A late-night creak of the floorboards, the sound of my neighbors upstairs, the pipes in the walls groaning, things that made sense in the context of an old building. But then the dreams started. It wasn't the usual kind of dream. You know, the ones where you wake up and brush them off, forgetting all but the most vivid images. No, these dreams were persistent. The same dream, night after night, of walking through the hallways of Millfield Asylum. The figure was always there, just out of reach, standing at the end of the hallway, waiting for me. It never moved, never came closer, but I could feel it watching me, its presence suffocating. Sometimes it was dressed in those tattered hospital robes, just like I remembered. Other times it was just a shadow, nothing but darkness that seemed to stretch forever. Every night I would wake up in a cold sweat, gasping for air, my heart pounding in my chest. The walls of my room would feel too close, too tight. It was as though the asylum had followed me home, settling in the corners of my apartment, filling the space with its suffocating presence. One evening, a week after the incident, I received a text from Chris. "Meet me at the diner. Need to talk." I didn't know what to expect, but I had a sinking feeling in my stomach. When I arrived, Chris was already sitting in a booth, staring at his phone, his face pale. I slid into the seat across from him, and he didn't immediately look up. When he finally did, his eyes were wide, haunted. "You're not going to believe this," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I wasn't sure if I wanted to hear it, but I couldn't back out now. "What's going on?" Chris took a deep breath. "It's happening to me too." I didn't need him to elaborate. I already knew what he was talking about. I had been hoping it was just me, hoping I was the only one affected by whatever dark force was lurking in the asylum. But Chris was staring at me, his face twisted in fear, and I knew. "It's not just the dreams," he continued. "It's everything. I keep seeing it, that figure. It's like it's following me, like it knows where I am." I swallowed hard, trying to suppress the rising panic in my chest. "You're seeing it too?" Chris nodded. "It's not just in my dreams anymore. I'll be walking down the street or at work and I'll catch a glimpse of it just out of the corner of my eye. And it's like it's watching me, always watching." The weight of his words sank in. It wasn't just a nightmare anymore. The asylum, or whatever had been waiting there, had followed us, and it wasn't going to let us go. "Have you told anyone else?" I asked, my voice low. "No one would believe us," Chris replied. "And honestly, I don't want to talk about it anymore. I just want it to stop." I stared at my coffee cup, my mind racing. There had to be a way to make this stop. A way to rid ourselves of whatever had latched onto us. But nothing in the world could prepare me for what happened next. That night, I was lying in bed trying to sleep when I heard it. The footsteps. This time, they weren't in my dreams. They were real. The sound was soft at first, almost a whisper. But then it grew louder, closer, like someone was walking through my apartment, moving from room to room. My heart thudded in my chest, and I held my breath, listening. I forced myself to get up, to check the apartment. The floorboards creaked beneath my feet as I walked from room to room, but there was nothing. Everything was where it should be. I went to the kitchen, then to the living room, peering into the empty space. Nothing. But as I stood there, frozen in place, I saw something that made my blood run cold. A shadow. It was standing in the hallway, just outside the bedroom door. Tall, thin, its form indistinct, like it was being swallowed by the darkness. I froze, my body paralyzed with terror. I couldn't move, couldn't speak. The only thing I could do was stare. The shadow didn't move. It didn't need to. I knew it was there, watching. And I knew, deep down, that this was just the beginning. The silence stretched on, but the fear didn't let go. I tried to scream, but nothing came out. The air was thick, suffocating. I finally bolted from my apartment, not stopping until I was outside in the cool night air. I could still feel its presence, hovering behind me. I didn't go back to my apartment that night. I didn't sleep at all. I called Chris the next morning. He didn't pick up. When I finally reached him later that afternoon, his voice was strained, almost hollow. "I think it's too late," he said. "I saw it again, but this time it came inside. It came right up to me." I didn't know what to say. We didn't need to speak anymore. We both knew that the asylum hadn't just haunted our dreams. It had bled into our reality. And it wasn't going to stop until it claimed us. Part 3, the final reveal. We spent the next few days trying to ignore the terror we both felt. I didn't want to believe it, but there was no escaping it anymore. The presence in our lives, this shadow that had followed us from the asylum, was getting stronger. It was no longer just a feeling. It wasn't just the footsteps. It had become something real, something tangible. I stayed in a hotel for a while, away from my apartment, hoping that distance might help me shake the feeling. But no matter where I went, I couldn't escape the nightmares. Every night, the figure in the asylum would be there, standing at the end of the hall, waiting for me to get close enough. And every time I reached out, I woke up, drenched in sweat, my heart pounding in my chest. But it wasn't just dreams. I began to see it more and more, even when I was awake. One night, I was at a bar with some friends, trying to keep my mind off the chaos that had consumed my life. I laughed, tried to play it cool, but all the while I kept looking over my shoulder, feeling that sense of dread growing. It was just a glance at first, but then I saw it. At the end of the bar, standing by the door, was a man. Tall, thin, and dressed in tattered clothes. His face was obscured in the shadows, but I knew who it was. My throat tightened and I struggled to breathe. I couldn't look away. I couldn't tear my eyes off him. I reached for my phone, hoping to call Chris, but before I could, the figure was gone, just vanished into thin air. I bolted out of the bar, my pulse racing. The world felt like it was closing in on me, like the asylum was slowly pulling me back, drawing me in. But this time, I wasn't sure I could escape. The figure was getting closer. It was relentless, and it wasn't going to stop. When I called Chris that night, his voice was hollow, resigned. "I've been to the asylum again," he said. "I had to go back." "Why?" I asked, my voice shaking. "I don't know what I was expecting," he replied, "but I had to see it again. I needed to understand why it won't leave us alone. There's something I missed before, something I didn't see." I felt a cold chill sweep through me. "What do you mean?" I found something in the basement. A journal. Old, weathered, covered in dust like it hadn't been touched in years. It was from one of the staff members. It talked about a patient, a man who had been locked away for years, subjected to treatments. It wasn't just the usual things. He was experimented on, tortured. I sat in silence, trying to digest his words. The journal said the man was a shadow. Not just a man, but something more. Something the staff believed to be a manifestation of pure fear. They never knew how it got there, but they knew one thing. Once it latched onto you, it wouldn't let go. I could feel my breath catch in my chest. What does that mean for us? Chris didn't answer right away. It means we've been marked. Whatever was inside that asylum, whatever we disturbed, has attached itself to us. And now it's using us to finish what it started. His words hung in the air like a weight, suffocating me. I didn't know what to say next. We were trapped, but I didn't know how to escape. That night, I didn't sleep. I couldn't. The darkness in the corners of the room seemed to crawl closer with every passing second. I felt the coldness in the air, the heavy presence of something watching, waiting. The figure was near, I could feel it, its cold breath on my neck. And then it happened. I heard it. The faintest sound, like nails scraping against metal. I knew it wasn't real, but it was so real that it paralyzed me. Slowly I turned my head toward the corner of the room. There, standing in the shadows, was the figure. Its face still hidden, its shape barely discernible in the dim light, but I could feel it, the oppressive weight of its presence. I froze, unable to move, unable to scream. And then the voice. Not a whisper, but a low, guttural voice that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. You cannot run. It wasn't just a voice, it was a sensation, a feeling that wrapped around me, tightening like a noose. The room felt smaller, the walls closing in, as if the asylum was pulling me back, dragging me into its depths. With every ounce of strength I had left, I scrambled out of bed and ran toward the door. But as my hand touched the handle, I felt it, cold fingers brushing against my skin. I spun around, but no one was there. Just the empty room, the darkness. I ran, not stopping until I was outside, gasping for air. But even then, I could still feel its presence, hovering just beyond the edges of my vision, watching me. I don't know how long I stood there, trembling, but eventually I heard a car pull up. It was Chris. He had come to check on me, knowing something was wrong. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. We both knew the truth now. The asylum hadn't just haunted our dreams, it had twisted our reality, and it wasn't going to let go. We couldn't escape it. Not now, not ever. The figure in the asylum had marked us, and it was only a matter of time before it claimed us completely. We couldn't run, and we knew it.